Hannity just says with all the confidence in the world, those sound like, sort of utopian ideas. I just have more of a dark view of how humans are. I think people are bad and can't be trusted. As if that justifies anything that came out of his mouth previously. If people are so bad, what species do you want running the government? Who's going to run the FDA? Is it going to be a bunch of owls and zebras?
Hey guys, it's Naz here. I want to dive into Keith Knight's video. It's the title of the video is Six Questions for Socialists. I love the way Keith Knight expresses libertarian philosophies. The way he explains it is, yeah, it's just amazing. His content is awesome. You may have heard of him if you follow Dave Smith or Tom Woods. But if you haven't, I highly recommend this channel, especially if you're getting into libertarian philosophy, NCAP. Yeah, if you're into philosophy, politics, and you're exploring kind of learning new things, definitely check Keith Knight out. His channel is Don't Tread on Anyone. I'll also leave a link in this video. But yeah, let's get into it and let's see what he has to say.
6 questions for statist. Again, I people often get embroiled in this, communism versus fascism versus socialism and all these different forms of statism. But it seems like the problem, right? The actual problem is all under the canopy of statism itself. So what are these 6 questions? Who is the author and what point is he driving at in this essay?
The author is a Canadian philosopher, Stefan Molyneux, who sort of became popular on YouTube some years ago. And what he's saying is, look, there's a lot of technicalities when it comes to debating, things about the state. First, they tell you to fight about healthcare, then fight about agricultural subsidies, then fight about tariffs, then fight about the Banderites fighting in Ukraine. He goes, let's really get to the root of what the disagreement is between people like himself, anarchists, and people who advocate the existence of a government. He goes, here are the most productive questions you can ask, because if you've ever been in a conversation with a government believer, you know that the conversations can last forever and get nowhere. So here is his guide. It says, question 1, does government actually solve the problem in question? So when people say, well, what if there's a dispute? Now I can go to a court. In the absence of a government, I couldn't go to a court. Well, first of all, there's tons of private arbitration organizations all around us. There's authorities within society. Every company that you work with has some sort of like HR department. So that, first of all, there are alternatives. Second, government courts take years to render a verdict. There's an extraordinarily high opportunity cost in time and monetary cost with finding a lawyer, hiring a lawyer, not finding a corrupt one, because the lawyers that I've come across, some are either like the greatest people ever or the absolute scum of the earth. It's extremely risky because you have to go to law school to get a license. Even if you know someone who's brilliant on the law, they can't argue on your behalf unless the state has granted them.
Yeah, and I think also throughout history in many different societies, I mean, right now, like the government we have is the biggest government ever in human history. But throughout history, throughout society, when government wasn't as big, or even if government was just maybe the monarchy, or government wasn't involved in every day-to-day life. People did figure out how to solve disputes, and I know like certain societies, like the honor system was very, very big and important. That's why like people fought for their names and their reputation. I know like there were people like in a certain tribe, there would be like certain leaders in that position where they would not take they would take like an unbiased position to solve a dispute or a problem, or like a family elder or the head of the family, things like that. So I think people always found a way to dispute and solve problems. I don't think it was always the government, but yeah, I think that's he said that really well.
A protective license. So claiming that, well, courts exist, that doesn't mean we have universal protection. Leftists will constantly say, what we should have is universal health care, as if the divide is between either everyone gets it or only some people get it. Giving the state a monopoly on healthcare, the state has a monopoly on education. Is everyone educated? The state has a monopoly on on policing. Does that mean everyone's private property is always protected and no one ever gets murdered? Of course not. So governments don't always actually solve the problem that people are claiming. Best example in America might be something like Medicaid, where the divide is, okay, there's people who can afford healthcare and people who can't afford it. For those who can't afford it, that's who we're worried about. Therefore, we're going to give them something called Medicaid. And we've seen a drastic increase in healthcare costs since the implementation of Medicare and Medicaid under Lyndon Johnson, of course, and they never apologize. So governments don't actually solve the problems. That's the first one. Second, can the criticism of the anarchic solution.
Also, I would say even if they solve it, they kind of have to keep it going to justify their existence. I myself, who worked for a city agencies for many, many years, it was an employment agency. I worked with, small businesses and mid-sized businesses, and basically offered free recruitment services, that was granted by the city. And so, I kind of understand the ins and outs of like everything that the government does to, to provide these services. But it's never, the services may seem like, oh, it's helping and it's, solving a problem, but it kind of isn't, because we're incentivized to keep those problems. It's like you solve a little bit, but you don't actually solve the problem itself. Like you make sure it continues, so that way you have a job, right? So because like as soon as you solve it, then what do like what are you there for? But I feel like that's how governments, like all these different programs keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's like, like weren't they supposed to solve this, years and years ago? But instead, they just keep getting more money. They just get bigger. They expand it, and the problem doesn't ever get solved. So I think they get in. They may maybe help temporarily, but they actually make it worse. But maybe it's by design, maybe it's just the nature of the beast, but yeah, I think they definitely continue the problems.
Be equally applied to the statist solution. So when people say, well, under a free market, you could have people only shopping at one place, and this might lead to a monopoly. However, the very existence of a state is literally a monopoly on violence. If you try to compete with them by doing whatever they do, issue taxes, issue tariffs, try to regulate other people, you will go to jail because the state is literally a monopoly. So if your claim is, I'm terrified of the potential of monopoly, therefore I'm going to advocate a monopoly, you are certainly not thinking clearly. And that was Molyneux's point there. He said,
Yeah, and I've also always made this point, so especially with this point with my friends, that it's the government or the state that creates the monopoly, not, like we're taught in school that government came in and broke up the monopolies. But if you actually study history and you understand, what the monopolies were, all government did was break them up, and those big corporations, all they did was corner the market, and they still maintained their monopoly. So they actually didn't do anything. But the way a government creates a monopoly is if there's a free market, then someone starts a business. If there's money to be made in that industry or field, then other people will also get in and try to make money, because at the end of the day, everyone's working for their self-interest. But once government comes in, creates regulation, and don't let the market compete or get bought out by one corporation or business, and they create regulations that help the existing business but hurt or stifle new businesses from developing, or for example, like minimum wage. I've done two videos on those, so if you haven't watched, make sure to check it out. But yeah, like governments will create minimum wage, which is basically a regulation. The big corporations can afford that, whereas someone starting out may not be able to afford that minimum wage that the government set that favors the bigger business. I mean, that's kind of simplifying it. There's a lot more to it, but they're essentially just helping that corporation stay in control of that market. Whereas if that government wasn't involved, then competition would be more fair. And, you know, the corporation, the only way they can truly become big and become a monopoly is if they're the only ones that can provide what they provide, in which case, then that's fine. But, as long as there's money to be made, and people will work towards their self-interest to compete and also provide a similar service or similar good. So yeah, I think government gets in and they create monopolies basically.
Third, is anarchy accepted as a core value in non-political spheres? So the examples he uses is dating, career choices, education, and so on. That people will often make these decisions based on profit incentive, how much money, how much they enjoy it, and whether other people can market or persuade them to do such a thing. But they usually rule out initiating force to achieve such an end. So Molyneux's point is people love the anarchy they live, but tend to love the non-anarchy that they just so happen to have gone to school for 12 years to be told is terrible. Not a coincidence. Fourth of the six, Molyneux says, would the person advocating statism perform state functions himself? He's saying that if someone says, oh, yeah, well, it's okay to issue property taxes to fund public schools, that's a very abstract statement. And people are used to saying it. They probably don't even think about it. So his question is to say, okay, before we talk about them, this concept, the state, I want to talk about you. Do you have the right? Let's look at this house over there. You watch the woman come out and you say, do you have the right to cage that woman if she doesn't give you 3% of whatever that state says her house is allegedly worth? Do you have the right to cage her and shoot her if she resists? Just don't chip in to this education program. Does the Catholic Church have the right to do this? Because there are Catholic schools where people learn a lot. There's the Libertarian Institute, which provides a free education on history, economics, and philosophy. Does everyone have the right to do this? And if it's so justified, why are people so hesitant to do it themselves? When it comes to rape, kidnapping, slavery, murder, people have no problem saying, hell yeah, I would have the right to defend myself or use defensive force against someone doing something terrible like that. But when it comes to, well, how about issuing taxes? And then they go, well, you know, we live in a society and society has rules, and then they get extremely abstract because it's so uncomfortable that they have to form up some rationalization. So because we should be very optimistic, because if people truly believed it, they'd say, yes, I'd have the right to do it myself. The fact that they get extremely uncomfortable when talking about the implications of what they're advocating is what Molyneux's talking about. He says, number 5, can something be voluntary and coercive at the same time? So many advocates of democracy, especially, will say monarchy is terrible. You just have someone ruling over you. However, democracy is done through the consent of the governed. This is a clear example of something that people only believe because the process of repetition has made them assume that it has to be something that's legitimate. So since it's based on the consent of the governed, it seems like it's not like you're actually not able to opt out of funding the IRS or opt out of engaging in these regulations and occupational licenses. So if democracy is legitimate because it's based on consent, and people can't give their consent to disassociate with the Lindsey Grahams of the world, how can you say that the very thing that justifies your system, consent of the governed, it then necessarily violates by definition? That is Molyneux's 5th point. And finally,
yeah, I think that's a great point. We live in a democracy, so we vote, uh, but then once we vote and certain taxes and certain things get passed, or like we don't have a say in where the tax money goes, right? Like it could be going to these wars. Well, it's not could be, it is. But we have no choice of opting out of that. Like we can't decide, like, okay, we don't want to put our money here. We don't want to put. It's just, either you do or you don't, and you if you don't pay taxes, well, like you said, you will go to jail, right? So it is a weird system where it's like, it's a democracy, it's freedom, you get to vote, but then you don't really get to vote because you still have to, pay when, like it's not a voluntary system. If you needed a service, like the way I think about it is, a business exists and you willingly pay for their service, right? Pay for their good, like you buy it. They don't force you with the threat of violence to give them money. But in this case, for the government, that is what they do. It's like you're being forced to. Again, if you don't pay taxes, then some people with guns will come and arrest you. It's not like they will just say, hey, you didn't pay, will you go to jail? And then you say, no, I'm not going to go to jail. It's more like they'll come, they'll arrest you, and they'll put you in a cage, right? And if you resist, then we know what happens. So yeah, it's a weird system.
Does political organization change human nature? So if you say, so Sean Hannity was having a conversation with Penn Jillette, and Penn Jillette made some pretty good libertarian points, and Hannity just says with all the confidence in the world, those sound like, sort of utopian ideas. I just have more of a dark view of how humans are. I think people are bad and can't be trusted. As if that justifies anything that came out of his mouth previously. If people are so bad, what species do you want running the government? Who's going to run the FDA? Is it going to be a bunch of owls and zebras? It's going to be people. But hold on. 1 second ago, people were terrible and greedy and couldn't be trusted. And now you give them the power to coercively rule. It's one thing to say people are greedy, and that's why we need a free market where we can disassociate with bad actors because people are greedy. What the Sean Hannitys of the world say is people are greedy, and some of them should have the right to coercively rule over others. And all these evil, greedy, lazy people should be able to vote once every 4 years to determine who rules over everyone else. So whether you think people are all good, all bad, some evil, well, that's actually an interesting one where you think, well, people are mostly good, but there are some evil people out there. What kind of personality do you think is attracted to, hey, you get to coerce people to do things and they don't have a right to disobey you? You think it's the average person? No, of course not. It's the Lindsey Grahams and Anthony Weiner's and Kamala Harris's of the world, the most psychopathic of them all. The average good person wants nothing to do with that. So because the existence of a state does not change the very human nature, which that every political philosopher since Thomas Hobbes has used that as a justification for if there is a state, it's because life would be nasty, brutish, and short, and people are really bad. Well, then we can't have a state because the most evil people will be attracted to it. And in the free market, there are evil people, but they still can't get a penny out of your pocket unless you voluntarily give it to them. I hear Steve Jobs was like a total jerk, but thank God he didn't have his security was a private security team for Apple, protecting, your material through things like passwords. So even the evil people in the free market have an incentive to be good people to cooperate with. That's why the understanding of.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Kind of just to reiterate, both in government and in corporations, like I think to get to the top, you have to, I guess, be, I don't want to say evil, maybe evil, but like it's a certain personality that gets to the top, right? Like the person that's willing to do whatever. But as Keith said, in a free market, the greedy person can only become rich by providing, right? I think that has been the history of capitalism, especially early on. Now I know we conflate cronyism or crony capitalism with the true capitalist philosophy or true capitalism. Um, but yeah, in order for you to become rich, is you need to provide, and I think Tom Woods also made this point. You can't just steal something that people don't have, right? You creating something new, a new idea, a new product, new service, new whatever. Like if you're the first person to create something and then and solve a problem, you will make money from that. And in order to make more money, you need to constantly improve. And as soon as you make money, there's going to be competition because again, there's money to be made and people want to make money. So yeah, like if there's a free market, your greed can serve everyone. Once it's a free market, then everyone's going to compete. The greedy people are going to compete, and in order to get to the top, they're going to have to provide. Whereas, if you have the government, then the greedy people at the top of the government and the greedy people at the top of the corporations, they're just going to work together. They're just going to make sure that no one else can come in and compete, and they're just going to make sure they have the money and the power and sort of just keep everyone else, away, basically.
Of human nature and the implications are important to understanding economics. That's what I love about Molyneux's essay here.
Yeah, so that was, I think that was well said. As I said, I think Keith Knight, he is really good at expressing these ideas. The way he, verbalizes them, it's very easy to understand. Great examples. I love his videos. if you haven't checked out his videos, definitely check them out. They're, you know, a great listen. He also has a book out. I believe it's called, I think it's in his description. Yeah, the Voluntarist Handbook. Yeah, definitely check that out. Great content, great channel, and yeah. So shout out to Keith Knight. Amazing video. Well, you know, well spoken, great points. And I'll catch you guys on the next one. Take care.